Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLMs, that's anti-multi-level marketing, life, and some true crime content here on this channel. So if any of that interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to stick around. In today's video, we are going to go into part 3 of my NXIVM series. So of course, this is just based on the research that I've been able to do. I always encourage everyone to do their own research. I am by no means saying I'm any kind of expert, and there are some of my opinions sprinkled in this video. This is where we're going to go over the mysterious deaths and disappearances of some women that were very well known within NXIVM. I do have to issue a warning for this video in particular because it may not be suitable for everyone. There will be talk of suicide, sexual assault, and terminated pregnancies. I know that these can be very hard and sensitive topics for some people to listen to, so if this is something that you can't listen to and you can't watch this video, I highly recommend just skipping over this part of the series. In case you have not watched part 1, that's where I went over a few of the key players that are commonly associated with NXIVM. Part 2 was more of a deeper dive into NXIVM, along with speaking on their colored sash ranking system and their 12-point mission statement, along with a few other things sprinkled in. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. There is an entire documentary called The Lost Women of NXIVM that covers all of these women in further detail. And if you remember from part 1, there was a woman that I spoke about by the name of Gina Hutchinson. When she was 14 years old in 1984, she had been raped by Keith, who was 24 at the time. In the state of New York, this was and still is statutory rape. In August of 2002, Gina reconnected with Keith and decided to join NXIVM. On October 11th of 2002, Gina was found deceased with a gunshot wound to the head, and her death was ruled a suicide. This happened at a Buddhist monastery, a place where Keith would be banned from eventually due to his advances towards the women and girls that were at this monastery. There has been speculation that Keith could have been responsible for Gina's death, and there is an article where Heidi, Gina's sister, had something to say about this. So I won't be reading all of what Heidi wrote, but let's go over some of it. As most of our readers know, my sister, Gina Rose Hutchinson, was found dead of a gunshot wound to her head on October 11, 2002, on the grounds of the KTD Buddhist Monastery in Woodstock, New York. Other young virgins Gina's age, some of her dearest friends, had also been repeatedly raped by Rainier. I don't believe Gina knew of those until many years later, if ever in some cases. In fact, another of Keith Rainier's underage rape victims, who wishes to remain anonymous, confessed to me in about 2009 that she never told Gina that she, too, was raped by Rainier. One of the reasons for the girl's secrecy may have been the social stigma at that time, especially within certain religious cultures attached to a female's loss of virginity. Another reason Gina's friends may have long kept quiet about being raped by Rainier in their early teen years was that Gina had an ongoing relationship with Keith for decades thereafter. Rainier talked Gina into dropping out of school for him to become her mentor and convinced her that eventually they would marry and start a family together.
Keith had this belief system that he was instilling in these girls that, society was moronic and society was the culprit that brainwashed people against their true natures, and disempowered women and, sexual mores were all about keeping women bound and chained to the patriarchal system. He had those kinds of beliefs with regard to everything, including the school system. He didn't want Gina to go to school. He wanted Gina to leave school and become his consort. And she did, actually. He convinced her that he would be her mentor. And she was bright enough, and she certainly was, that she could get her GED and not have to go through the system. The system was the enemy. Society, and that's where I feel he really took her life completely off course.
Rainier also claimed that Gina was a reincarnated Bodhisattva who would achieve enlightenment by following his teachings, that Rainier was preordained or meant to be her spiritual as well as secular guide and soulmate, a concept that is not so alien to many traditional patriarchal religions. In Mormonism, for example, the religion Gina and I were mostly reared in, every male member holds a holy priesthood, while a female church member's only direct link to God is through her husband's power of the priesthood. Gina was always a spiritual seeker, fond of Eastern philosophies like Buddhism especially. In Rainier, for a time, she found a God who had recognized her as his consort and set her on her life's mission to achieve enlightenment. In late 1989, however, Gina discovered that Rainier had been unfaithful to her for many years prior, that he was fornicating with other girls he mentored, many of whom Gina herself had recruited to become his earliest acolytes or inner circle. Gina was of course devastated, but after recovering from her shock and heartbreak, she went to work for Rainier's company, starting with Consumers Byline in its IT department. I well recall the day in 1990 that Gina arranged for me to meet the smart, plucky Kristin Snyder, a young woman from out of town who was moving into the place Rainier already shared with a female roommate and business partner, Karen Unterreiner, at the now notorious 3 Flintlock Lane in Clifton Park, New York, near Albany. That day, Keefe lectured me that Gina's heartache over Rainier's broken promises was unwarranted because, quote, Gina doesn't own Keith's dick, end quote. Now that was something I agreed with, contrary to Rainier's apparent fear that I intended to leave with his dick in hand after what he did to Gina, so long as it might help Gina get over the douchebag Rainier was and is, though I don't think she ever truly did, unfortunately. Gina remained besties with Kristen thereafter and continued socializing with and often working for Rainier while searching for a new soulmate to match his broken vow to her. She also went on to a failed Mormon mission and successful college completion. Beginning in the mid-90s, Rainier experimented on Gina and, according to Kristen for one, attempted to mind condition Gina into committing suicide as a way of achieving enlightenment in her next life as a Buddhist goddess. Kristen's testament to that fact is, by the way, well substantiated by Gina's journal and other eyewitnesses who have come forward. Rainier used snuff and suicide films and pictures along with street theater or gaslighting techniques to brainwash Gina into suicide, although in the end, the actual cause of her death may have been murder. Gina kept journals recording her dreams, thoughts, and events periodically for several years. In one rather prophetic entry dated July 24th, 1998, Gina writes, Dreams of Keith. Everyone is there writing recommendations or a report for some agency that is checking his background. Karen, Pam, Kristen, etc. and I have a sheet to fill out, and Keith is extremely nervous about what I might say. Somehow this report is linked to his goals, money, power, achievement. I decide that I won't reveal the negative things about him, but I choose not to say anything at all. Leave it blank so not to perjure myself in the future if I have to state the facts. It occurs to me that knowing him has changed my life pretty profoundly.
Ultimately, it was her choice. And, nobody pulled the trigger but her. But if there were emotional triggers, certainly there were. I think some of those were set by some of the events.
You can come to your own conclusions or do your own research into this, but I do find it odd that so many tragedies occurred around Keith Rainier, which brings me to the disappearance of a woman from NXIVM as well. This woman was 35-year-old Kristin Snyder, an environmental consultant that paid $7,000 in November of 2002 to attend this 16-day course in Anchorage, Alaska. Kristen was described as an overachiever, and she was hoping that taking these classes, which she started off by taking classes in human potential in addition to ESP classes, would improve her life. Kristen was also an academic, having a master's degree. By February of 2003, while at the 16-day intensive course in Anchorage, 35-year-old Kristen started to act differently. Heidi Clifford, Kristen's spouse, said that Kristen was very sleep-deprived, delusional, and suicidal. February 6, 2003 was the last time Heidi saw Kristen. Kristen left the hotel they were staying in very upset. Alaska State Police think that Kristen drove out to Resurrection Bay and could have possibly drowned. There was a note found in a notebook inside Heidi and Kristen's Toyota Tacoma. The note read, quote, I attended a course called Executive Success Programs, aka NXIVM, based out of Anchorage, Alaska, and Albany, New York. I was brainwashed and my emotional center of the brain was killed or turned off. I still have feeling in my external skin, but my internal organs are rotting. Please contact my parents if you find me or this note. I am sorry, life. I didn't know I was already dead. May we persist into the future. No need to search for my body." End quote. Unfortunately, Kristen's body was never found but was presumed dead by suicide. Kristen had no prior history of psychiatric or emotional issues before joining NXIVM, although they found other notes that were written before she disappeared, and it seemed like she was going through a mental breakdown after getting involved with these programs. In my opinion, I don't doubt that whatsoever. The techniques that they use and just how sleep deprived many people could have been, along with the multitude of other things, including brainwashing they had gone through and the indoctrination, it's just not surprising that people would have breakdowns after becoming part of NXIVM. I mean, it is a cult after all. Kim Snyder, who is Kristen's sister, suspects that there was foul play and doesn't believe that the suicide note was written by Kristen. Although even with their suspicions, the family didn't file any police report. Kim did say that about a month before all of this happened, she had noticed Kristen had changed. Kristen was normally very level-headed and stable, whereas after she started taking these ESP courses, she was screaming and crying and just a completely different person. According to Rick Ross, Keith Rainier told the members of the cult that Kristen's suicide was a hoax. He said that Kristen was still alive and she had moved to Mexico. Along with that, there was a point in time where Nancy Salzman had said that the suicide note was fabricated. The main argument was because NXIVM was spelled the way that it actually sounds, kind of like the medication NXIVM, not with the spelling that we know today. She said that the ESP programs weren't called NXIVM while Kristen was part of the programs at the time of her disappearance. In addition, Nancy spoke about how there were two notes, an original one and one that came later, and the one that came later was the one that was published in the media. She suggested that Kristen may have been alive and just tried to fake her death. This was all under oath while she testified for the deposition of the Rick Ross case. There was an investigation that was launched into Kristen's disappearance by NXIVM. When Nancy was asked why, her response was, quote, "Well, Kristin Snyder disappeared while she was taking one of our courses. At the time, both Esther Chapone and Ed Kinham, who were teaching the course, were very concerned that she didn't come back, and then when they found out that she had disappeared, they communicated with the Alaskan police. They communicated several times to the best of my recollection, and the police never attributed or linked any part of her disappearance to NXIVM taking the course or anything like that," end quote. When asked who they was in her statement, she replied with, quote, "Her partner, Heidi Clifford, and I believe her family, because they had a memorial service for her within 3 weeks. That seemed very odd to me because when I really looked at how long people evaluate or remain hopeful that loved ones will be found after their disappearance, whether it's in a situation of war or a situation of disappearance, or even when the World Trade Center collapsed, people remained hopeful for weeks, months, and even years that they would still find their loved ones, and I don't believe had memorial services. But to do it within 3 weeks, it seemed odd that they came to the conclusion that yes, without finding a body or any other evidence, that yes, not only did she disappear, but she died and had a memorial service," end quote. Nancy was asked about this suicide note, and she said that there were two, as I already stated earlier. An original note that was left, but was not the one that was publicized in the newspaper a year later. The one that Nancy stated was published in the newspaper was the one that had NXIVM's name on it, and it was spelled incorrectly because it was spelled the way that it sounds, not with just the letters, and that the name NXIVM wasn't released to the public at the time. According to Nancy, the original note that police showed Esther Chapone was allegedly different. In her testimony, she kept saying, quote, "That seemed very odd to us," end quote. I'm not sure if she was nervous, but Nancy, that seems very odd to me that you keep saying that. Sorry, I had to. I did find a photo of an alleged ESP logbook from November of 2002, where it shows the name NXIVM very clearly at the bottom, along with Friday Night Volleyball. And if you didn't watch part 2 of this series, that's where I kind of spoke about their volleyball nights that they have. So it is quite possible that Kristen knew the name NXIVM with the actual spelling that was used in the note. Kristen's mother knows that the note that I presented to you earlier was in Kristen's car, but she's not sure if her daughter wrote it. With that said, there has been speculation surrounding Kristen's disappearance and the suicide note that was left. Judging by what people have said about Kristen, it was unlike her to act the way she did after taking ESP courses. During Keith's trial in 2019, someone testified that after Kristen disappeared, Keith paid $24,000 to obtain the password to her email account. What is Keith hiding? Barbara Jeske and Pamela Cafritz were both rumored to be Keith's live-in girlfriends, according to Oxygen, who both passed away of cancer. Barbara had passed away of brain cancer in 2014 and Pamela of renal cancer in 2016. Some have speculated that maybe both Barbara and Pamela were poisoned, which caused the cancer. At the time of their deaths, Keith had inherited Barbara's $3 to $4 million estate and Pam's $8 million estate. Barbara's sister Cindy did explain that Barbara was taking some kind of pills that smelled really bad. Apparently by this point, Barbara was already very sick, but she would just chew them and drink water or just drink juice afterwards. She didn't know what was in them, but said there could have been some kind of poison in them, and that once Barbara was semi-comatose, Cindy stopped her from taking them. In addition to that, Barbara was skin and bones. She weighed 65 pounds right before her death, according to Cindy. Cindy said, quote, "I do believe Rainier poisoned my sister and those other women, and I think he should be held accountable. I think Barbara started figuring out what was really going on in the group, and once he realized she was figuring it all out, I think he just wanted to do away with her, along with the fact that she was aging and he wanted younger women to take their place. So he got rid of the older ones and replaced them with younger ones," end quote. Cindy was actually a nurse that tried to care for Barbara for the last 6 weeks of her life, and Keith tried to control everything within the last few days. This included banning Barbara to take pain medication and arranging for her to change her will. Later on, Cindy would also explain what happened after Barbara had passed away and what Keith wanted to do with Barbara's body. Quote, "When I first got down there, she was still with us, and I asked her what she wanted to be done with her body, and she said, I want a Christian burial, and I want it at my mom and dad's. But then the group told me they were going to take her body and freeze it, that they had the rights to it. And at this point, she started going into a coma. I had to seek out help of an attorney who said it was illegal for them to take her body. They still wanted to take the body, and I said, no way, and Keith said, okay, we'll take the head. It was extremely upsetting for me and also very suspicious. I even had to follow them all the way to the funeral home after her death to make sure they didn't take her body," end quote. I'm honestly at a loss for words. Can you imagine losing your sister, having a suspicion that someone did this to her, and then having to worry about her body possibly being either stolen or being taken apart? That's another level of disturbing. Then there was Pamela, or otherwise known as Pam Cafritz. Pam was a very high-ranking person within NXIVM, and she was Keith Rainier's life partner. Pam was a daughter of Washington socialites Buffy and William Cafritz. Keith and Pam had met when they were younger while they were on a ski trip, and after that, Pam had become involved with him during the 90s when he started his company, Consumers Byline Incorporated. Pam co-founded a subgroup, if you will, of NXIVM that was called Jeunesse. It was started in 2006, and some articles say that it was started by Keith, while others say Pam Cafritz was also involved in starting this group. But this organization claimed to be a women's movement, or like a women empowerment type of a group that was supposed to explore what it means to be a woman. Jeunesse promoted the type of thinking that men and women are wired differently.
For Jeunesse, I think, is the most gratifying thing that I've ever done. It's the most challenging thing I've ever done because it consists of working with a group of people in a way that is totally interdependent, meaning we're all working together and no one is ever punished and no one is ever told that they're wrong or they're bad. And the most important thing in working on Jeunesse is the relationships in Jeunesse. And I'm not used to that. I'm used to the objective being met. I'm used to having like strict, hard, fast deadlines and lots of fear and punishment if I don't get it right. And in working for Jeunesse, there isn't any of that. So it comes purely from a place of self-motivation and self-direction, and that is really difficult. But I would say that working for Jeunesse is the most satisfying and purposeful thing I've ever done.
According to some testimonies, Jeunesse members were allegedly taught women are irresponsible, if not narcissistic, self-absorbed, and inclined to cast themselves as the victim. In other words, this group was disguising itself as women empowerment when it really wasn't. This is just a brief overview of Jeunesse. We are going to dive into this in the next part of this series. If you remember from part 1, I spoke about a woman who had been kept in confinement. They referred to her as Danny or Daniela. Well, she was a DOS slave. She had allegedly become pregnant by Keith, and Pam was allegedly there to guide Danny through the process of getting an abortion for this alleged pregnancy. Danny has said that she believes Pam was there to make sure Keith wasn't liable for certain things. What's incredibly sad is an incident that I had read about that happened to a 12-year-old girl that Pam was allegedly involved with. She hired this girl to walk her dog, and she would have the girl visit the home that Keith and Pam had together. Her mother actually worked for Keith's company, Consumers Byline. Keith allegedly raped her on more than one occasion, and then 2 years after this, in 1993, the now 14-year-old at the time filed a police report. In the end, Keith had her sign a waiver saying that what she had told officers was not true and she wouldn't press charges. I would really like to know what Keith could have possibly, allegedly, threatened her with that she signed a waiver. After Pam had passed away, Keith, along with a few others, used her identity and credit card to charge over $300,000. However, as I mentioned earlier, Keith inherited a lot of money after Pam's death. So why did he use her credit card? In the closing statement that Assistant U.S. Attorney Moira Penza presented, she did say, quote, "Why did he use Pam Cafritz's credit card after she was dead to fund his lifestyle? To avoid paying taxes," end quote. I don't find that statement to be too far-fetched, and I do agree that that's probably why he did it. In one article, they said that they had 4 cats living in that house as well, and they too became ill and were diagnosed with cancer. These were the only people and animals that lived in this house because, of course, Keith didn't live there, so it is a bit suspicious. I mean, there's no concrete evidence, nor did Keith admit to poisoning these women, but in my opinion, I am speculating that this wasn't a coincidence. There was a former NXIVM member named Kristin Snyder who dated Keith and was diagnosed with cervical cancer. The only difference is Kristen survived. Kristen was incredibly high-ranking, and she had been by Keith's side from 2007 to 2014. She dealt with more of the legal side of NXIVM. Kristen was the one who worked with the lawyers to fight lawsuits and to go after people who were spreading information that would possibly expose NXIVM for what it really was. Keith and Kristen did have a son together. And while their son was their biological son, Keith had made Kristen say that they adopted him so that Keith could uphold his reputation about being celibate. It was reported that Keith tried to keep his son away from people and that he was to be cared for by 5 different nannies. Each one had to speak a different language. Towards the end of Kristen's time at NXIVM, she found out about some more shady things that were happening when it came to the finances. In 2014, Kristen was really worried about her son's well-being, so she left NXIVM. When she first escaped, she stayed at the home of Frank Parlato in the Florida Keys for about a year. I can't even imagine how scary that must have been to be so terrified that you go into hiding. I'm not excusing any of the bad things that she could have possibly done within her time at NXIVM, but at the same time, I do recognize that she was indoctrinated into this cult. People will do anything when they're in a cult, especially for their leader. Kristen and her son have been in hiding since. According to one article, they spoke about how Kristen had alleged in 2015 that Keith had asked a Canadian investigative firm called Canaprobe to obtain financial information on 6 federal judges, a U.S. senator, a reporter, editor, and publisher of the Times-Union. All of this is absolutely horrible and disturbing. This is why I'm such a cynic and I analyze everything. I won't sit here and say that I'd never join a cult because, as some people call MLM companies commercial cults, I joined not 1 but 2 MLM companies in my life. Anything is possible, but I've learned more about cults within this past year than ever before, and it can really happen to anyone. If we look at something like Scientology, there is so much information out there about Scientology, but people still join Scientology every day. According to Oxygen, there was an unidentified woman who lived with Keith as well, who survived bladder cancer. This woman had given a hair sample to a forensics expert, and they allegedly found traces of poison that is found in gunpowder and rat poison. Frank Parlato stated, quote, "I don't think the official stories on the deaths of these 4 women should be allowed to rest without a challenge," end quote. Frank, I agree with you 100%. Now that I've spoken about some children and Keith wanting to uphold his reputation of being celibate, even though he wasn't, let's talk about some other children that Keith had or almost had. Of course, we already spoke about Kristen and Keith's son, along with speaking about how Daniela had this alleged abortion. Well, when Daniela testified, she spoke about how not only did she allegedly terminate her pregnancy, but so did 2 of her sisters. Daniela had this alleged pregnancy in 2003, while her sister Camila was allegedly pregnant and terminated her pregnancy in 2008. Another one of Daniela's sisters, Mariana, allegedly terminated 2 pregnancies with Keith before she got pregnant a 3rd time with her son. I cannot imagine what these women went through emotionally and mentally, especially if they wanted to have children or if they dreamt of being a mother. If all of this is true, and that's why I said allegedly a bunch of times, because I only saw a few sources that were talking about this, not all of them talked about this. So if this is true, what kind of monster forces women to terminate their pregnancies all because he wanted to have his cake and eat it too, allegedly? He wanted to appear celibate, but would have sex with countless women and then tell them that they couldn't be with any other man besides him. I'm going to end part 3 here. Part 4 will be about the inner circle, or DOS. That's when I'll speak a little bit more about Alice and Mac's involvement, along with the branding and starvation of these women that went on. We'll also look into other related organizations within NXIVM, or just organizations that were kind of having ties to NXIVM. I know that this portion of my NXIVM series was a very hard topic, a very heavy topic, and very sensitive to some viewers to watch. So, and the next part is going to be pretty heavy too, because as I said, it's dealing with DOS and the starvation and the branding and everything. But my heart breaks for the women that were involved in today's video, along with the families of the women, especially the families who do believe that there is foul play, that do believe that something else happened to their family member. So with that said, let me know what you guys thought of this part of the series. Let me know your thoughts if you know anything more, because depending on how many comments I get throughout this series, I'm probably, if there's something that I missed or something like that, it'll just keep extending the series a little bit more, or I'll just read your guys' comments regarding any information that I may have left out, because there's so much that has to do with NXIVM that I know I'm going to leave certain things out. I know that there's going to be things that I just don't find, or the fact that I haven't watched The Vow yet. So there's probably information in that I haven't presented to you guys yet. So anyway, if you have watched up to here, let me know what you guys think. I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching. And this is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye.